To Blake and Brian, welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our first ever onboarding session for new members of the Oregon Consular Corps, featuring Ambassador Niels Marquardt. I thought I would ask each of you to just, if you're muted, unmute for a moment. First, Blake, and then Brian, and introduce yourselves a little bit and just say which country you're representing or aspiring to represent and how long you've been in the role or in the process. I am reminded by my wife recently that Zoom meetings are sort of take on the air of a séance where you call out to see, are you there, and can you hear me? Do you have everyone with you, and so forth. But it would be much nicer if we could be together, but in person. But this will work as well as possible these days. Blake, do you want to go first?
Sure. And thanks to everybody for pulling this together. This is interesting. I'll be quick. It's also something I've learned in Zoom. Talk less, smile more. I learned that from Hamilton, but I represent the Federal Republic of Germany. I've been, I want to say, year and a half. I've been doing this already, but I don't know if you've noticed. It's been a little strange. What I have been doing is my real job is I'm the head of school at the German International School out in Beaverton. I've been doing that since 2003, and Robert and I have done a lot of tag teaming on representing Germany since 2003, essentially. So the honorary consul part of the job is something that I've done a lot of up until I started doing the honorary consul job. Now I do mostly, it feels like mostly legal affairs, legal and passport. That is taking up of the time that I have for the honorary consul role. It's that the passport processing and notarization and all of that legal affairs stuff takes up 125% of the time that I have. And so I've really, and I feel very delinquent with regard to working with the Oregon Corps. And so maybe eventually I'll be able to get back to that. I'm glad to be here today to not talk about legal and passport affairs. Good enough?
Fair enough. Thank you, Brian.
Yes, fellows, hello. I am not the honorary consul yet. My travels in Ireland and living in Ireland for a while, and most recently I represented the Republic of Ireland down at the legislature when they were trying to declare Ireland a tax haven country. That we successfully defeated, and I've been involved with the consulate ever since. My application's in. I think COVID has slowed down some things. I know they're trying to open, I think, 11 new honorary consuls this year throughout the U.S. And I've really enjoyed working on it. I'm looking so forward to doing passports, just like Blake does. And hope this all turns out, because I've really found it being very interesting, and they really are kind of promoting businesses, Irish businesses in the Northwest, and working to get them connected. That's been fun, and I'm looking forward to this time when we have the list of all the contacts you can give to companies in Oregon to get them adjusted, and I think this is just a great idea, this onboarding. Hopefully I land the plane sometime this year.
We're looking forward to that too. Our goal is to, for today, is to give you as newer members or a potential member of the course some very useful, practical information and resources. And the not so secret agenda is that if we do our job well, we hope that you'll find the core a good thing to invest in for the sake of the knowledge and the contacts that the Corps can offer you in this role. When you're not doing passports, there are plenty of other things that that need to be done and should be done, and we think that we can help make those things more efficient for you, getting to people you need to talk to, and knowing a few things that we've kind of learned through the School of Hard Knocks. One little housekeeping item at the end. I'll circle back to this. We've everyone identified October 7, 1 week from today at noon, as a time slot for conducting a second session, which may be a continuation of work with Niels, or it may be the launch of a more Oregon-specific program, depending on what we do today. So we'll come back to that. In the meantime, be thinking about whether you're available on the 7th, and if that does not work, we'll find another date, but the 7th did look promising a while ago. I'll also ask for feedback on this at the end, and hope that you'll give us some insights as to whether this is helpful, and if not, how we can improve. It's all about you today. With that, I'll turn it over to Cyril to welcome you and to introduce Ambassador Marquardt.
So thank you very much, Robert. And indeed, welcome, and thank you for accepting to participate to this session. So I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the Oregon Consular Corps this year, and I'm working with Greg on the board and others, Gail, on trying to essentially make the association as valuable as possible for the members. I have been an honorary counsel since 2016, so I am really also a newbie. And one of my frustrations has been finding my way through what I call the alphabet of organization in Oregon. There are probably 20 to 25 different organizations / associations who claim to have a role in promoting international trade or global relationships or something or the other. And it's at times very hard to figure out, well, you know, who exactly is the most valuable contact, who's got the experience, the depth, in who can guide us in being most effective when we have a trade mission coming, or whatever the reason might be. In the same context, personally, my life has always been in the business world, and so I am very far from the proper diplomatic language and protocol and so forth. And so when Niels graciously accepted to lead this session, this was wonderful. I believe we have shared with you Niels' bio. It is extremely impressive. He has served with the Foreign Services for quite a long time. He has been an ambassador, and he is also extremely active, both with Lewis and Clark College, but also with the association. I think he has done more to volunteer on the association than any new members, and that is really greatly appreciated. And like Robert say, you know, the purpose of this onboarding is to make the association more valuable, but also your personal contribution when time allows, know whether it's being on a specific committee, whether it's sharing a committee, or at the very least expressing your opinion is extremely important, because we are trying to be something else than just a social club. We're trying to provide a real value, and that means that we need to learn. We need to have the proper, honest feedback that is necessary to get the job done correctly. With that, without further ado, I would like to leave it up to Niels to take us through the world of diplomacy.
Thanks, Cyril. Thanks, Robert. I think we're going to post some slides up in a minute, but I'd like to just say, if we haven't done this before, we're going to be seeing slides up here, right? Here they come. Yeah, very good. Yeah, I'd like to, I know, Blake, you've done this for a while now. Brian, you're looking forward to doing it. Hopefully this will give you some perspective on the job that you're in or about to embark on. Next slide. So just a little background on me. The main thing that you'll see here is that I've never been an honorary consul. So some of what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit theoretical. It'll give you the view more from an embassy. My last job in the Foreign Service was as a consul general, though, consul general in Sydney, Australia, and some of the other countries I served in, like France, Germany, and Thailand, all had multiple consulates. So I have some idea of the perspective back and forth to the embassy from the embassy that I'll talk about today. And just to lay it out there, the United States does not have honorary consuls. We have foreign honorary consuls, obviously, in the United States, but the only thing that we have that's similar is something called a consular agent. So, for example, if you're down in Mexico and you're in Cancun, where we don't have, or Cabo San Lucas, where we don't have a consulate or a consulate general, there is somebody that's paid by the U.S. government to help you out when you lose your passport or get arrested or whatever the mishap is. Next slide. So just, you know, you're going to be part of the mission of your country. You are part of the mission of your country. And I think it's important to understand how that is structured. Obviously, just about every country on earth has an ambassador in Washington. It's usually somebody who's a career diplomat from your country, but not always. One of the countries I know best is Australia, and Australia has typically sent very senior, mostly political class representatives to Washington. They've also sent career ambassadors from the Foreign Service, like myself. But you've got a mix in places like Washington or London or Tokyo. You've got a mix of different kinds of people, predominantly career Foreign Service officers who rise to the role of ambassador, but not always. Now, in Washington, that is for most countries among or even the most important embassy that they have. They tend to be very large embassies. And very large missions. Those two words, mission and embassy, the embassy is the, you know, the place in the capital, and the mission is the overall presence of representatives across a country. So as honorary consuls, you're part of the German or Irish mission to the United States. Next slide. So Deputy Chief of Mission, or for some countries, Deputy Head of Mission, DHOM, or I always just would say DCM. For the United States, that person is also going to be a very, very senior career person. Many of them have already served as ambassadors to smaller countries, and the sort of ranking of the position of Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington is quite often higher than that of ambassador in many other countries. I'll again use the example of Australia. If she's still there, the last DCM that I knew there had previously served as ambassador, Australian ambassador, to Cuba and Mexico and most of the countries of Central America. So, and sometimes they might even be referred to as Ambassador, you know, Cooper in this case. So you might have several people in an embassy that are referred to as ambassador. Personally, I think it's better just to have one person that you refer to as ambassador, but that's a matter of personal choice. And you know, the reason to do it, the reason to call Ambassador Cooper as the DCM in Washington, Ambassador Cooper, is simply to raise her profile. And when you know you're seeking the ambassador can't do everything. If the embassy calls to make an appointment for Ambassador Cooper, maybe it's more likely to stay with a senator or a senior person in a department, or maybe even the secretary of the department. Using the title might actually make the difference between being given the appointment or not. So the DCM is really the principal sounding board for the ambassador, probably the only person that might call the ambassador by his or her first name behind closed doors. The ambassador, the DCM gets all the nasty jobs that have to do with human resources problems, discipline. Quite often the ambassador just wouldn't be even clued in on some of those things, or at least not involved directly. And then when the ambassador is not there in the embassy, the DCM is known as the Chargé d'Affaires, or CDA. You'll see those initials sometimes. And also between ambassadors, when one appointment has expired and the new person has not yet been named or arrived. So you'll just hear that person referred to as the Chargé. And I would say being a chargé is not the same as being ambassador. You're warming the seat, you're keeping things moving, you're probably not launching new initiatives. So if you're the honorary consul here in Portland and you have a chargé in Washington, and you're waiting for the nomination of a new ambassador, you shouldn't expect new initiatives. If there are a lot of new initiatives coming out, that's probably not a good sign. Because the whole purpose of that period is to sort of lay the groundwork for the new ambassador to arrive and, as they like to say, hit the ground running. Next slide. By the way, if there's anything I say here you want to just interject a question, please do so.
Niels,
yeah.
This is Robert. I'm going to take you up on that just for a moment to, first of all, I've been remiss in not introducing Greg Caldwell, the treasurer of the board, who is also the host of this meeting. And then I see that Greg, in his role as host, has just admitted Wilfred Pinfold to join us. And you might need to scroll down to the bottom little window on your Zoom screen to see him. But Wilfred, if you could just say hello to the group. Welcome, and happy that you could join us today.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be late. I actually was on with Karen Pierce, being introduced to the new ambassador and the connection. So I didn't want to break away from that too early. So I apologize for being late here. I've been looking forward to the meeting. So, but Wilf Pinfold, I'm the honorary consul for Oregon. I live in Portland, Oregon, and have been on for, I guess, just over a year now as honorary consul in Portland.
Thank you
for the UK.
Join us.
Thanks for that, and welcome aboard, Wilfred. Anyway, I was just saying, please interrupt if you can, if you have a question, or else you can keep them for the end. There should be a little time left. So let me now talk about what we Americans call the country team, and it can be quite a large, and it would be in Washington and for countries like the UK and Germany and Ireland, quite a large group of people, perhaps the largest diplomatic team that your country would field anywhere, because of the sort of levels of expertise and knowledge that are required to manage relations for your country in a place as complex as Washington, where you need to simultaneously have relations with both houses of Congress, as well as the federal government, as well as the 50 states, if you can. So I'll sort of move from the middle of the circle, which are the other professional diplomats who generally come from foreign ministries. We call our foreign ministry the Department of State, but just about I can't think of another country that does that. They're called the foreign ministry. And within the country team, you'll have representatives covering usually 5 different areas: political, economic, consular, management or administrative, and public affairs. That's how the United States is organized, and most other countries are as well. And then there's different titles that go with these people that can be confusing. And that's the ones I've listed there. Minister counselor is usually the highest ranking. So you have a minister counselor for political affairs in Washington. They run the political all the political matters in the embassy. There may also be a person called the political counselor who would report to the minister counselor. And so on. Economic is the same way. You could have a minister counselor for management affairs, public affairs, etc. The term consul general can be two things. One, it's the regional person in a place like San Francisco or Seattle, but it can also be the person who is running the consular section within the embassy. It's probably the person that you as honorary consuls would turn to, or someone on the consul general staff, either in Washington or regionally, depending on how your country organizes itself, to get all that kind of very changing and technical information straight on, what is current policy on, passports and visas and other consular matters. But beyond those 5 different sections of the embassy that are manned by people from the foreign ministry, you also have in a modern embassy in Washington many different agencies who are represented by people with different titles. They may have some diplomatic titles like counselor, but they would cover things like immigration, customs. They'll certainly have somebody doing intelligence, agriculture, commerce, trade. Public health is quite a big topic, obviously, these days. Economic cooperation. Even in Washington, you would have maybe a representative. I don't know if this is true today for Germany, but you might have a representative from the German Economic Development Agency, not to administer programs in the United States, but to coordinate on the development approaches to countries in Africa or elsewhere. And of course, the ambassador is in charge of everybody. Ambassadors have the ability to ask people to leave if they don't feel like they're doing their jobs properly. And that seldom is necessary, but it is always a possibility. Next slide. So I talked a little bit already about consuls general and consulates. Most large countries would have maybe 10 or even a dozen consulates general. So we have consulates and we have consulates general. Consulates general are larger. They're headed by a consul general. Smaller ones are headed by a consul. For example, in Thailand, we had a consulate in a place in the south called Songkhla, but a consulate general in the number 2 city in the north called Chiang Mai. So just to be aware of those different nomenclature. If you call a consul general a consul, he will be offended because it's a question of rank. There's also vice consuls. So vice consuls are sort of the working level people who you might go into an embassy and have a visa interview. It's probably not the consul general or the consul that is interviewing you, but it could be one of the vice consuls. Now, I said my last job was in Sydney as consul general. I had very little to do with consular work, with the issuance of passports or visas. In fact, I was pretty much instructed to keep my fingers out of it. We don't, in the United States, we don't want political influence, or you going to the vice consul and saying, well, this guy had dinner at my house last night, I think he's a great guy. People have to fall or stand on their ability to present themselves in an interview. And occasionally though, mistakes are made, and a consul general might have, or an ambassador might have, some insight, but that's generally not how the work is done. So I've listed a bunch of the cities here that in the United States that have almost certainly a consul general for a large country. I'll mention Australia because they have in California, they have LA and San Francisco, but they don't have anybody in Seattle. When I left Australia, I volunteered to be their consul, their honorary consul for the Pacific Northwest, the same way they have somebody in Denver and Miami. But I think they just decided they didn't have enough business up here to justify one. So I am not the honorary consul for Australia up here. I'd also just point out that quite often other ministries besides the foreign ministry might be the entity that's providing the consul general. For example, again, I'll use the example of Australia. In San Francisco, that has been designated as a consulate general that is to be headed by somebody from their trade ministry, and that is their main focus, is on, you know, Silicon Valley and other reasons justify having somebody there that has a very strong trade focus. It's important sometimes because to know which ministry a consul general comes from, because it will explain what they really know well and what they know less well. You know, if the consul general is from the trade ministry, they're going to be all over trade, and they probably won't want to try to answer too many questions about immigration, for example. Next slide. So this is just a pet peeve of mine. Two different words, counselor and consular. It's not the consul general, it's the consul general, and so on down the line. And to make it more confusing, there are diplomatic titles, as I've mentioned, that are actually the word counselor, like counselor of embassy for political affairs. You could even have a counselor of embassy for consular affairs. But just generally speaking, we are the Oregon Consular Corps. You are honorary consuls, etc. That's just a pet peeve in that. Next slide. And I've already mentioned how these consuls general can come from different ministries. Some of them can also come from just be like ambassadors, very prominent citizens. For example, New York. New York is, for Australia, New York is a place where the consul general of Australia is almost always a political person, a former or a senior businessman, somebody with a close relationship to the prime minister, for example. And that could be the case in a place like LA or San Francisco as well. Now, in terms of reporting relationships, for example, if you've got a consul general in New York City who is very tight with the prime minister of your country or the chancellor or your political leadership, you may find there's a little bit of rivalry there, and that there's a little bit of tension about reporting relationships, that the consul general is, because an ambassador always wants to have some control over the flow of information and not have, contradictory or messages that he or she may disagree with. Not to say there isn't dissent, but they do try to discipline that process. And if you've got senior folks in places like LA or New York, who may, by the rules of your country, have independent reporting ability, they may not be required to clear their reporting with the embassy. But these are all things that just make life within a mission a little bit more interesting when you have these kinds of independent relationships. And then just on New York, it won't affect us out here very much, but that's a place where there generally are two separate and completely distinct offices for any foreign country. Their mission to the United Nations, which is strictly diplomatic, they probably wouldn't have anybody there that could issue a visa or a passport. It's all political and economic work that has to do with the UN and all its specialized agencies. And for the United States, that the position of ambassador to the UN is actually, depending on the presidency, can be cabinet level. And for other countries, it's also a very, very senior diplomat. So again, the example of Australia, you could have 4 or 5, the ambassador in Washington, the ambassador at the UN, the consul general in New York, perhaps the consul general in Chicago, and maybe another one, who are quite senior people within their own country with their own relationships, and perhaps some difficulty in coordinating their messaging. Something to watch out for. Next slide. So, I had a discussion recently with somebody about the difference between consular and diplomatic work. Maybe that's a good place to point that difference out. Diplomatic work has to do with the overall relationship between, 2 nations. It's usually done in capitals or in places like New York, that are capitals for multilateral diplomacy. And then consular work is generally meeting the needs of citizens of a country in terms of visas and registering births abroad, sometimes giving information about access to Social Security or other social services, answering general questions, and then diplomatic work is mostly done in embassies. The issue of a consular district, Wilfred, you said you're the consul general for the UK for Oregon alone?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. You have no responsibilities across the Columbia River?
Not directly, no, but I am working with a group that is working on the Cascadia corridor all the way up to British Columbia, and so not officially, but yes.
Okay. Well, that's, and the district that you represent is something that's defined when you apply to the Office of Foreign Missions in San Francisco. And, I'd say for most consuls general in Seattle, it's probably the 4 states that I've listed here: Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and maybe Idaho. But that can vary entirely by country. For example, again, Australia, that doesn't have a consulate general in Seattle. They've kind of divided California in half, and I think they've got Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, Idaho, and then Los Angeles takes care of. Sometimes Hawaii is an issue as well, although for the Australians they actually have a consulate general in Hawaii, but their focus is almost entirely on military cooperation through the Indo-PACOM military command at Pearl Harbor. So, it's quite possible that consular services would be provided not by that office, but from either San Francisco or Los Angeles. Next slide.
And that was part of the discussion, is that I don't have to deal with passports or travelers. It's really much more associated with economic development.
Aha, interesting.
Yeah.
So I've already touched on this, but I mean, consular work usually, you guys have the whole range here, but some consuls, honorary consuls, are told not to be involved with issuing visas, that should be done by professional vice consuls and consular officers in places like San Francisco, Seattle, or Los Angeles. That is all a matter of choice by your country when they elect to create an honorary consul position. They not only have to define the district in which you will do your work, and you are not, if there's an emergency or something and you needed to move people across or out of a consular district, that would be something you would coordinate with the Office of Foreign Missions, and they would say yes. But generally speaking, when an honorary consul position is created, the district is defined. There is an explicit list of the things that honorary consul may do, and there's also a list of the things that the honorary consul may not do or will not do, is not asked to do. So again, every country is different. Some of you will be more involved in doing, passports and documentations and visas. Some may be less. Some it's much more just having a kind of a face and a representation. So again, that it all depends on what your country asks you to do. Next slide. So this is probably worth thinking about quite a bit because we just don't know what disaster is going to occur and where, and whether citizens of the countries that you represent may or may not be involved. Things like airline crashes, which hardly ever happen anymore, thank God. But quite often that can change the course of not only your day but your week and your month. So having a way to reach your citizens, I don't know if I know the United States would. We have in every country we have a system where we try to get either expats or visitors, even visitors, to register electronically with the embassy, so that if something does happen, it could be a political disturbance, it could be a COVID message these days, it could be anything that would affect a traveler or an expat, that we have the ability to send out travel advisories and other text messages. We're not tracking anybody. There's no other use of that information. But I think if your country doesn't yet have that, it's probably something that they're aware of and perhaps going to implement. I don't know. Blake, does Germany have that system of registration?
Yeah, they do. It's really robust and well orchestrated.
I would imagine. And Wilfred, for UK?
I think what you're asking is those things are handled out of San Francisco.
Okay, so they're registered in San Francisco, and that's where they pump the messages out from. Yeah, it may or may not affect an honorary consul. Good point.
It's for Belgium. It's all centralized in LA, but it's a national register, and so when anything happens, they have the ability to contact each of those citizens. Strangely enough, because of privacy protection laws, they will not give me a copy of the list of Belgian citizens in my territory. So it's a bit frustrating, but that's the way it works.
Right. Okay, next slide. I think I mentioned on the previous one, just voting can be. Are any of you either UK or Germany? Are you involved in registering or administering voting for your countries?
Thank goodness, no.
No.
No, okay. But that is quite often something that's dealt with in consulates general. Official visits to your region, it's kind of like a disaster preparedness, but it can be a very positive thing. I think if you enjoy this work, which presumably you do since you're in it voluntarily, the idea of getting attention and visits, helping to put Oregon on the map. I would think that would be something that would be very rewarding, and probably the choice of you as honorary consuls has something to do with their perception that you would know what to do if a minister came from London or Berlin or Dublin, and that you would have good ideas and access to make these things happen. It's also senior visits. Oregon. I suppose if an ambassador came to Portland once in a 3 or 4 year tour in Washington, that's probably all that would happen, just one visit. And then maybe the next ambassador would come, or maybe they would have a particular interest in Pinot Noir and they'd come every month. These are people, they have interests, sometimes that drives why they go where they go, not just sort of official business. But using these official visits can also raise your profile. If you don't know the governor, the mayor, or other senior officials here beforehand, you may end up knowing them, and that could be useful to you in lots of different ways. My advice on visits by senior people from Washington or capitals is first you want to understand why they're coming, and you can also reach out to the other consuls general and people in Washington to ask questions about, what do they like to do? What kind of, how do they like to spend their time? Is this somebody that wants to be booked, from, 7 in the morning with breakfast till, dinner ending at 11 p.m.? There are some people like that. They want every minute to be programmed in some useful way. And then others want more downtime, want more, more chance to kind of get to know the city and the state. But those are things to know in advance and kind of not learn the hard way. And then, Oregon has lots of fun things to do. I mentioned Pinot Noir, for example, or the Columbia Gorge. I mean, it's a shame. I think it's a shame for people to come from far away here and not to, afterwards people say, well, did you go to the gorge or did you go taste some wine? And it's like, no, the person who planned my trip didn't include that in my program. I don't think it's a good look. So probably enough said about that, but that can be one of the more interesting and fun parts of your role here. Next slide. So I've already covered most of this. Maybe I'll just ask Cyril, who you report to in your role as honorary consul for Belgium. You're muted. I'm not hearing anything. So, or Blake, do you want to maybe take that question? I'm not.
Sorry, I report to the Consul General in LA. So that would be my normal quote unquote chain of command. On the diplomatic side, on the consular side, there is also a consul who's in charge of consular matters, also based in LA. And every 2 years, we have a consular conference in DC. And normally, in theory, every other year, we would have one in LA, but it has not taken place ever since I've joined, I've taken up the duties.
Okay. Is that, I see people nodding. Is that, Blake, is that your experience too?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think the work of, I would just call it basic diplomatic work is building your Rolodex, so that whatever that you think might happen, whether it's a visit or a disaster or, a crime involving one of your citizens, that in advance and already, to the extent possible, have built a relationship with that person or with that entity. And of course, the world is a very dynamic place, and people in useful roles are constantly changing roles. And so somehow you have to keep your radar out to know when people have ended their time in a certain role. I mean, one of the worst things that could happen is you have something that's truly an emergency, and the person that you thought was going to help you is no longer in that role, and you don't know who is. So and that's something we'll talk about probably next week more with how the Oregon Consular Corps can be a resource, so that not everybody is having to develop their own discrete list that tells you who at the Port of Portland or in the city government or the state government is a person to go to for whatever circumstance comes along. But my guess is that you wouldn't be you wouldn't be listening to this message if you didn't already have a pretty good network. And of course, every network can be improved. And hopefully your consulate that you report to or Washington would also have some sort of checklist a checklist for honorary consuls, so that you're not having to make it all up yourself. Next slide.
Is it not working anymore?
Okay. So this is some just basic, I would call it, diplomatic tradecraft. It's not that different from what you would normally do, but I guess some of these things might not be done things by sort of, normal citizens. Obviously, COVID has made face-to-face so much more difficult, and probably also made it easier in some ways because let's start with things like welcome receptions and courtesy calls. Things that I've done, hundreds of anyway. I don't want to exaggerate, but the number of courtesy calls, taking the time to make an appointment and go see somebody in their office and introduce them. That's something that's quite known among diplomats. It's probably less. I think it's less known in a place like Portland. People probably are expecting you to come and see them if you have an issue and not just to introduce yourself. So I don't know, what has been your experience as honorary consuls with that sort of thing, a courtesy call? Cyril?
But from my point of view, it's very useful because it doesn't take that long and it prepares for the future.
Okay, so it is a done thing here. I would say the first thing I say is a welcome reception is a great way to kill a lot of birds with one stone, if you will. Whether or not we'll be doing that again anytime soon is anybody's guess, but generally you just want to shake somebody's hand if we ever do that again, and just lay eyes on a person, and then that allows you then to follow up, and then dinners and lunches are a major tool of diplomacy, getting people together. I imagine, Wilfred, for your Cascadia corridor discussion there, you can getting 6 or 8 people around a lunch or dinner table to talk about can be quite useful as an example.
It would be. We have done a lot of Zoom calls.
Yeah.
If I may add something,
Yeah.
and I think, Brian, you can probably attest to that. Randy Miller, who's part of our organization, knows everybody and his brother. And so he kind of put together the list of around 20 people who are part of a committee helping selecting the awardees of the business awards that we give for Celebrate Trade. And so that's a very easy, quick way to get to know the movers and shakers, frankly, in the Portland scene. So just an invitation to get involved in that if you want to. And then the Celebrate Trade event, unfortunately, we had to postpone the one this year, and hopefully it'll take place next May. Is a wonderful opportunity, to network, because you will see Governor Brown, Mayor Ted Wheeler. I don't know whether it'll still be the same next May, but and a bunch of other people. And so within the span of an hour or so, you can meet a lot of people.
There used to be a policy as well for the consular corps that when the monthly lunches occur, people could bring guests and invite them along, and that's another sort of excuse to meet someone and bring them, give them something special to meet other people as well.
And if I may add to that, as part of the onboarding process, our goal is to invite through a Zoom session the top 4 or 5 key contacts whom we would feel will be most valuable to you, so that okay, if you need to get an appointment with the mayor, who do I contact and who is that person, so that you can at least have all that type of information, or the Chamber of Commerce, Prosper Portland, and so forth and so on. So we'll get that on the agenda as part of this onboarding process. And then when we can finally resume the lunches, of course, each time a person gets into the job, like, for example, Chido right now for Mayor Wheeler, when she took the position, we made sure she could join us for lunch and be introduced and explain the role she was taking.
So I do think a personal letter when you start your role is a good idea. Identify, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, it could be a number like that, different people who may be helpful to you and who would probably appreciate knowing that you're in town. And if they then hear from you, they'll know who you are without you having to explain it so much. We already talked about leaning on your other honorary consuls and consuls general in the consular corps for ideas. And then the other thing, if you do have like Cyril and Blake were describing these periodic meetings of your counterparts in other cities, just always looking for best practices and ideas. It's going to be different people that you want to know, but what has worked for others can work for you as well. Next slide. I don't know to what extent this comes up for you, but I mean, just in the last 6 months, the way Portland has become, and in the debate, how many times do they mention Portland? I don't think that's ever happened. All the wrong reasons, perhaps, but I would imagine that embassies in Washington wonder what's going on here. I don't know if you've been asked or if you have volunteered to share your perceptions on what really is happening in our city, but it's something that that you could help with by giving kind of a trusted set of eyes and ears in Portland to share that perspective with people in Washington who are probably trying to explain it to their capital. Embassies in Washington do reporting on political and economic situations and changes in our country, and that can really help. We've already talked a little bit about business, trade, and investment. That may be your main focus. I would imagine if it is, that you would have especially strong relationships with the people in the embassy who care about that, or people in San Francisco or Seattle who care about that. But you can always add value in those areas as well. Next slide. I just think, again, having served in embassies, the idea that you would go to the effort to try to understand who cares about what in your mission would probably allow you to be more effective, even on things that are not really part of your narrowly defined job. Just for somebody to know that in your embassy in Washington, that there is somebody in Portland who can talk about Oregon in a useful way. I think that can be super helpful. And these different, conferences every year or two, or however often, it's never often enough, but they are really great opportunities to learn how to do your own job better. Next slide. Yeah, we've talked about the different relationships with consulates general and conferences. I think one thing to be super aware of is just how much turnover will be part of your life as an honorary consul. How often people turn over the ambassador 3 or 4 years max, and that's pretty much true of everyone else in an embassy. All right, next slide. Protocol, I don't think protocol plays much of a role in a place like Portland. I think just acting natural is, you're Oregonians anyway, so there's really no need to act in a particular way. Things like driving and parking and airport access are things that are provided for by the Vienna Convention. The host country, United States, is supposed to make it easier for you to do your job. But diplomatic immunity is something that is almost irrelevant, I think, for an honorary consul. If you did have a car accident performing your official duties, there would be some level of protection, but it wouldn't extend beyond that. Now I see we're just about out of time for today, so I think I'll stop there and see if there's anything we should go over.
Question.
I need to get onto a 1 o'clock Zoom call, but I noticed that Blake was asking about Randy Miller's list, and I think in the coming session we're going to get a very extensive list. And I really appreciate the thoughts you gave me, Niels, about being ready to let your consul general, whatever city, know what's going on in the state of Oregon and the city of Portland. Those questions do come up, and that's very good to key on that.
Before you go, are you available next Thursday, 1 week from today at noon?
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it's Wednesday, isn't it? It's the 7th?
I think it's the 8th.
Oh, it's the 8th.
Yeah, it's the 8th.
All right. I
Oh, the
apologize.
8th. Hang on.
That. It is the 8th, Thursday the 8th. Now we have to see if everyone's available on that date. And you can let me know either by nodding or, I see one thumb up. I nod from Wolf.
I am available.
Yeah.
8th.
At noon. Yes.
We can also cover topics that you might think of, for example, on, if anything does come to mind on protocol, things for Niels, and follow up when we next meet. We will plan to put together a program that involves any follow-up questions you might have on this subject, plus linking you to the right people in Oregon for next week. Cyril?
I think, Niels, you agreed that we could share your I think you agreed that we could share your presentation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be great.
I would like to thank you, Niels, from all of us for